Let me start with a scene that many leaders can recognize. A leadership meeting that is completely packed, back-to-back agenda items, lots of updates, everything feels urgent, and then in the end of the meeting, someone says, "Oh, we didn't get to the strategic discussion again. We'll have to park it for next time."
Oh yes, we hear that and see that actually in a lot of leadership teams. And don't think it's just the small companies, it's big organizations where we see that.
It certainly is. And welcome back to The Leadership Effect. I'm Camilla.
And I'm Catherine. This is where we talk about leadership as it actually shows up, not how it is described in theory.
And today we're focusing on a core leadership capability.
Yes.
Strategy.
Strategic thinking.
Yes. And it's not kind of this strategy documents. It's not the annual offsites, but it's really how leadership teams think, how they decide, and how they work together.
Yeah, I think we talk about this a lot, how quickly the move worlds around, how quickly change happens, and that it's only really the only constant that is happening, change. That means that leadership teams are incredibly busy, but still, it's what we often see, they're so much stuck in the operational rather than in the big picture thinking and the forward thinking.
Yeah. And we're not saying that this is easy, right? But what we're going to focus on today is really how does the leadership team go from running the business to help shaping the future of the team, of the organization?
Yeah. And let's name the problem first. Leadership teams get pulled into everyday decision making, problem solving, escalations, and that shouldn't sit at the top. Reporting instead of organization's decisions is often what's happening. So we've sat in leadership meetings where it was just about giving updates. It was just about, what is that person doing and how is this project progressing? But that is not what executives should be doing in their leadership meetings. They should be focusing on kind of like the long-term rather than the short-term goals and giving and setting the direction for the long-term success of the organization. And sometimes it's also of not trusting fully what the teams underneath them are capable to.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not just executives, right? It's also leaders, but the long-term thinking and what you strategize about might differ depending on where you are in the organization, right? I think but there's so many meetings that I've been in that I'm thinking, why am I even here? Like, why didn't you just send me an email? Because it's just information share, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of meetings then become an activity. And it becomes about the activity and not about the direction.
Yeah.
So and to your point, Catherine, I think there's so much pressure on organizations and therefore leaders and teams to deliver today that I don't think leaders don't care about strategy.
No, not at all. Sometimes they don't know really how to because they're getting so much pulled into escalations, into problem solving, into kind of like firefighting that it's really hard for them to step out and do this helicopter view of what is actually happening. And again, things are so much changing, and I've seen that like in so many teams I'm coaching. It's like you are so tactical here, and you don't need to be.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, strategy keeps getting pushed out of the agenda, right?
Oh, completely.
Or if it's on the agenda, it still doesn't happen because you need to get to the other things first. And it's kind of back to this. We live in a world now where high growth, transformation. I mean, there's cost pressure, there's constant change. You say change is the new constant, right? And this is just where companies operate.
Yeah. And to be fair, I just said like they don't know how to. I think they don't know how to get out of the cycle. They are absolutely capable. It's not about incompetence, but it's some kind of like they default to what feels really urgent right now, or we have to do this right now because this is here in the moment. It's not, we can't think about long term if you haven't solved this one first.
Yeah.
And that is what I see. Yeah. Happening.
But what's really dangerous here is that the strategic thinking uses a different muscle than operational execution does, right? So if you never practice those muscles...
Yeah, it's like being in the gym, right? You can't expect to do a full pull-up if you've never done anything to strengthen your biceps and you strengthen your latissimus dorsi or whatever, like, right? You can't just expect unless you're a natural talent.
Yeah.
But
so it begins over time when you don't use it.
Basically. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
With everything else.
Yeah.
And we kind of like need to think about it of what gets in the way. But before we get in the way, what would a really strategic meeting or strategic thinking looks like? What would it look like in a leadership team meeting?
Yeah. So I mentioned that I've been in a lot of meetings where kind of information sharing is kind of the focus of the conversation. And really what we did in those meetings was usually looking back, right, at historical data, historical reports, or like, this is what happened, and might just be relevant for some of the people in the room.
Yeah. And some of it might be important in terms of reflection and learning, right? As we said, like sometimes we need to, what have you learned from it? But that's rarely the angle.
Yeah, but a majority of the time was spent on this, on providing information, right? So
yeah, exactly.
What we kind of lost out on was bringing us together and talking about what we saw and giving each other context of things. So we missed kind of that discussion, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be about, the big market. It's not, I'm saying like go out and read Bloomberg and figure out what's happening in the market, but it's more like if you're working towards customers, maybe it's about, discussing what we see in that market with our customers. What are our customers telling us? What are our consumers telling us if we work towards a consumer base? If your stakeholders are internal in the organization, what are they talking about? Because you need to figure out what's important for your team and your deliverables, but it kind of gets this focus away from what has happened to exploring what happens next.
Yeah. And what will happen, what opportunities are out there.
Exactly.
And it's also about kind of like in a leadership team meeting, it's about spending time on implication and choices. So leaders always have choices, right?
Yeah.
So if you as a leader want to really talk about some things that happened in the past or some data or what's happening in the here and now, send pre-reads out so you can actually spend valuable time discussing the trade-offs openly, name risks that are maybe at the moment on your agenda, test assumptions together, because that is much more valuable time spent than rather to going through a report or a deck of numbers which just showing the state of the company right now, rather than thinking like, okay, what are we doing in the future, and what are the possibilities lying ahead of us that can shape in which direction we are going.
Yeah. Or use it for learning, like to your point. So we've done an episode on resilience, right? And what we talk about there is really spending time on understanding what happened and what can be done differently, like what we can learn.
Yeah.
So let's take a very practical example then. Say you're going to run a meeting and something has happened. And what you do is that you come into your team and you spend 20 out of 30 minutes of that meeting giving them the data from whatever happened, instead of sharing information in advance, like you said, and spending that time with the team to discuss what did we learn, what can do we differently, how do we bring this forward to deliver even better results for our customers or consumers or whatnot.
Yeah, and if you really are managing this shift really, really well, you can actually see a shift into how the meeting feels. So there are definitely kind of like less slides. There's much more dialogue. There is more challenge as well, but there's also more listening to each other. And you know what? I also bet there's much more clearer ownership of what everyone needs to do and accountability of what everyone needs to do, because everyone is involved in the discussion. Everyone has contributed in the discussion. And it's exciting, right? That is why you all got to be leaders. You want to be strategic. You want to set the directions. And if you're not willing to do that, then you will be stuck in the past and in this endless cycle of running behind.
Yeah, and being reactive, which we will touch on later. But with that picture in mind, what are kind of the few blockers that we see? Not the few, the common blockers.
Yeah, one blocker is definitely confusion. Many leaders, senior leaders, they still, and we mentioned that before, they still manage as functional experts in the room. They go into the details when it comes to their topic of expertise, because that is why they feel most competent. They find that they are useful. They have the information. They may be even railguarding some of that information.
Information is power, right?
Information is power. Sometimes there's a lot of ego in a room as well. So, that all plays a role into why sometimes we are much more operational. But when everyone stays in the expert mode, we really lose the overall perspective, and it gets just lost, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
And I've seen it in a lot of leadership meetings.
And then you have those leaders that have really good intentions, right? So they put strategy on
the top of the agenda.
but it's not like it's put in the end of the meeting. So it's on the agenda, but end of the meeting, right?
Yeah.
And
guess what happens?
I mean, the energy is lowest in the end of the meeting. So, and it's only discussed when everything else has been done. So basically what you're saying is that all these other things are more important. And then if we have time, let's get to the strategic things.
And how often does it happen that we overfill an agenda and it actually doesn't happen at all?
Well, very often, to be fair.
Yeah.
So, I mean, then a leader concludes we don't have time for strategy because, we had to do other things first. But in reality, you haven't protected that time.
Yeah. And sometimes it's also what I see is when we are just stuck in the operational, we are becoming more and more reactive rather than proactive. And sometimes I feel when we trying to do things in a strategic manner, or when numbers only count and the results only count, we only thinking about like, okay, what can we actually do? What can we almost kind of like a little bit like headless chicken, and we don't give things enough time to actually work out. And that can then kind of like almost reinforce like, oh, it didn't work out when we've been strategic, so we're going to go back into operational mode. Yeah. Not maybe more subconsciously as consciously.
Yeah. But I mean, strategic thinking involves uncertainty, right? Assumptions, it involves risks.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what we don't know. And unlike very operational topic that happened in the past or that is currently happening, there isn't always a clear data set.
No.
You might read the data set and then you're making hypotheses or assumptions again and trying to figure out what to do, but there's no obvious answer to rely on. That's kind of my point. And
that can feel uncomfortable.
It's really uncomfortable, right? And you kind of need to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness of it, right? And try new things. And what I want to point out is that when we talk about strategy, because we haven't really said what we mean about strategy, it doesn't need to be that the company strategy. If you work in a big company, someone else will set that. But it's what's your team supposed to deliver on, and how are you going to get there?
Yeah, exactly. And taking into consideration the outside world as well, and how that is impacted. So it's taking a kind of like a more, rather the inside view takes kind of like the helicopter view. That's kind of like how I see it.
Yeah. And it's not about predicting the future, right?
No. Well, it's a little bit, but obviously we don't know the answer, but it's taking into several segues into consideration of what could happen.
Yes, exactly. So multiple possible scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of.
And that makes it quite tangible then, because as you say earlier, it's about making hypotheses and assumptions and seeing what could be the outcomes. What is the best case scenario? What is the worst case scenario? And what are the in-between scenarios that we need to prepare for, or at least have a little idea of how would we react to it.
Yeah. So it's kind of looking off the box, looking beyond the current operational cycle. And you mentioned external, right? So it's kind of connecting those external signals to internal choices, right? And you make trade-offs.
Yeah.
And then you decide what to do, and more importantly, decide what not to do, right?
Yeah.
We're not good enough to do that sometimes.
Yeah, and I think what is really important, and I feel we're coming back to this in every single episode, is like it needs to feel safe to make these assumptions, to name some of the risk, to challenge in the room And if that doesn't happen, leaders are not likely to speculate. They are more likely to just stick to what they know, which is being the expert, knowing the facts and data of the past.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And if we think about the difference between being in the moment, in the operational and kind of the strategy, an operational question is, how do we fix this issue right now?
Yeah.
Something's happened, you fix it, done. A strategic question, on the other hand, what does this issue tell us about what needs to change?
Yeah.
So it's not about fixing the issue. It's more about how do we prevent it from happening in the future? And is there anything else that we need to do?
Yeah. And I think this is a really essential shift that we need to make. And this question changes everything. It changes kind of like from the short term to the really long term perspective of what is happening.
Yeah.
Or what needs to happen, really. And that is what creates direction, and that is what's setting the focus for the next coming month.
It does. So how does leadership teams build this capability?
I think the first step is, as often, is clarity. It's about what decisions should only this leadership make and what should sit elsewhere. And then also the trust that comes with it, right? Trust and empowerment of the lower parts of the organization. And when that's clear, teams stop pulling into every direction and they're really starting to pushing back and start trusting decisions that happen on the right level. Until that's not explicited, it's really hard and your team will always be dragged back into the operational.
Yeah. So, I mean, strategic ownership then starts with strategic leadership starts with organizational ownership.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say, and not functional defense.
Yeah.
So there needs to be this deliberate space and attention that Catherine alluded to, and it needs to be designed into the rhythm of the team. So I'm not saying scrap the operational meetings. You need those, but just make sure that there's also time for the strategic discussions, and maybe those need to be in separate meetings.
Yeah.
If strategy always comes seconds, but in the strategy meetings, like fewer updates, more debate, fewer topics, deeper questions, and use pre-reads if possible, because then everyone has the same information going into the meeting. You're democratizing the information versus holding it. And that creates alignment and decisions that hold over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And strategic teams ask actually questions differently. They would, and not just asking questions differently, but they're actually asking a whole lot of different questions, right? Yes. They ask things like, what are we optimizing for? What are we sacrificing? What assumptions don't know? Which assumptions no longer hold? That's probably the right question. What would we do differently if we were starting today? These questions might feel at the beginning to slow down the conversation, but you know what? That is actually a really good thing, because when you slow down the questioning, you be able to think more strategically, because it's a different part actually in our brain that gets activated. But they also lead to better choices because people reflect more. And then obviously naturally in a team, they will also create stronger alignment and more sustainable success for the organization.
Yeah. I would dare to say that high-performing teams, they spend more time interpreting signals than reviewing past performance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those signals will vary depending on where you are in the organization, what organization you work in, what industry, and so on. But it's like market shifts, whatever that market is for you, customer behavior, whoever your customer is or consumer, technology developments, and talent availability. So strategy kind of lives in that intersection between what's happening outside and what's happening inside in the organization, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I often see in there is that within a leadership team, there's only one, maybe two people that are kind of like, they're leading the strategy team and they're seen as strategic experts. However, I would actually challenge this. While they can definitely be providing some of the data and insights, I think it should be collectively done as a team, and everyone should own strategy in their own sense as well, because that is then when things can really shift. because you can, as a team, then develop a shared language. You can develop a shared strategic outline of where do you want to. Again, you can encourage challenges together, and that is when then, as a team, you start being strategic rather than operational.
Yeah. And I mean, there might be some of our listeners thinking, but I'm super detail focused. I'm very task focused. Like I'm not that curious. I don't think about the bigger picture. In a strategy discussion, you need all types of thinking.
Oh gosh, yes.
So there might be someone who's super curious, who's super innovative, who's very like big picture thinking. But you know what they're not good at? They're not good at creating the plan of making things happen. They're not good at thinking about the risk. So that's where your abilities come in. And then, your muscle on the bigger picture, that's also going to strengthen after a while. So I think we shouldn't, different people will play different parts of the team and that collective strategic thinking, and then all of you will raise the capability as you go.
Yeah, and I think we said kind of like data is not important. I don't want to give the wrong impression. Data is actually really, really important.
Yes.
It's just kind of like, how do you interpret this data? How do you use this data? What data are you looking into? Into? And then if you are this detailed person, you'll be the one that is able to interpret this data, make sure that it's the correct data. So we need that perspective, actually, to your point.
Yeah.
And that is what makes a good, strong team when you actually have these different capabilities. I mean, we know how diverse teams actually are the better teams.
Yeah.
That is no different to strategic.
Yeah. And what I want to say as well is that small shifts can make a big change, right?
Yeah.
So atomic habits, 1% every day can make a lot. So don't try once and then give up. Figure out how to do it with a team, figure out the cadence, and then you tweak how you approach it as you go. So I do want to give our audience a challenge today. Yeah. So do you want to do the challenge, or
you go ahead.
So dedicate 1 meeting a month to strategy.
Yeah.
And decide what forward-looking topics is important for you, or what markets are important, or how you kind of set that agenda so it makes sense for what your team need to deliver on. But use that meeting for strategy. Don't let operational things kind of creep into the agenda. And try it at least 3 months on a row, at least.
Don't give up too early. That's my message.
Don't give up too early. But please do try it. And what are the signs that they're making progress?
Yeah. So for me, making progress includes having fewer escalations, clearer prioritization, and actually we're having different discussions, we're having more discussions, but also faster decision making, more confident decision making, and less rework. Strategic thinking is a skill, and it can definitely be practiced, but give it also some time. It won't be feeling perfect from the first moment you do it, but you will see that if you do it with intention, your team will follow. And if you're sitting at the top of the organization, I think it's also the layer below you that will feel the difference, and they feel more empowered, more encouraged, more motivated, and therefore much more engaged going forward.
Yeah. And I do want to emphasize one thing of what you said, is that if you spend time on strategic thinking, expectations and directions are going to be more clear for your team.
Yeah.
Because if everything is important, nothing is strategic. And that's really, really important to think about.
Yeah.
It's kind of having those few things that you need to deliver on and not everything.
Yeah. And that your team becomes less hectic as well.
Exactly.
And not as full on.
Yeah. And I do urge you, when you try this, having 1 strategic meeting a month, tell us how it goes. Share your experiences in the comments of the podcast episodes, because your experiences can be someone else's learning, and maybe someone else comments and gives you some learnings that they've experienced.
Yeah, and you might have done this shift already. I'd be really interested in hearing kind of what were your learnings that you've done, and how has your team actually shifted that? So, yeah. So that's it for today. Unless Camilla has anything to add.
No, I say just go and schedule those strategic meetings and discuss with your team how to do it and tell us about it.
Brilliant.
And
that's it for leadership, the leadership effect this week.
Lead with curiosity
and courage.